The air on the Stirling Bridge was thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the low, electric hum of the city. Below, the River Thames, slate-gray and indifferent, churned its ancient path. Elias Vance stood leaning against the railing, the wind whipping his dark coat around him, his gaze lost in the sprawling metropolis of London in the year 2077. It was a city of glass and ghosts, a place where life was lived with frantic, calculated intensity. He wasn't looking at the architecture, however. He was watching the people. A river of faces flowed past him, each a story, each a secret. But he, like everyone, could read the final page of every book. It was a subtle thing, visible only to the individual. A faint, shimmering set of numbers on the inside of their left wrist, a personal, immutable tattoo of light that appeared at birth. The terminus, your final day, month, and year. Elias's own digits burned in his mind, a constant, low-grade fever. September 22nd, 2077. His 28th birthday. Today was the 5th of September. 17 days. He felt the number like a stone in his gut. A sudden, jarring screech of metal tore through the city's drone. Elias's head snapped up. Further down the bridge, a double-decker autobus had swerved violently, its crimson chassis scraping against the safety barrier with a sound like a dying animal. Traffic ground to a halt. People spilled out of their vehicles, a murmur of concern rippling through the crowd. Elias felt an icy premonition crawl up his spine. He started walking towards the commotion, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He saw her before he saw the reason. A woman, perhaps in her late 40s, was clutching her chest, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. She was stumbling away from the bus, her eyes wide, fixed on something only she could see. Her partner was trying to hold her, his face etched with a desperate, helpless love. "It's all right, Mary. It's just a fender bender," he was saying, his voice trembling. Just a shock. But Elias knew better. He glanced at his own wrist, then back at the scene. He could almost feel the phantom tick of her internal clock. He pushed through the gathering onlookers, an unwilling moth drawn to a devastating flame. He saw the bus driver, a young man with a date decades away, looking pale and shaken. She just walked out, the driver stammered to a traffic warden. Didn't even look. Elias finally saw what the woman was staring at. On the pavement, half-crushed beneath the bus's front wheel, was a small, silver locket. It must have fallen. She must have gone back for it. A simple, thoughtless act. An act that had sealed her fate. He stood just a few feet away as her partner held her tight. "Mary, please," the man begged, tears streaming down his face. "Look at me." Not at the clock. "Look at me." But her eyes were locked on her own wrist, where Elias knew her terminus date was blazing with an unholy light, the numbers counting down the final seconds. He'd heard stories about the final flash, the moment the numbers burned brightest before extinguishing forever. He had never witnessed it. May 9th, 2077. Today, the crowd held a collective, silent breath. They all understood. This was not a medical emergency in the traditional sense. This was an appointment. The universe, in its cold, terrifying precision, was calling in a debt. The woman's gasps grew shallow. Her body, which had been fighting, suddenly went limp in her partner's arms. Her eyes, which had been wide with terror, softened into a vacant, endless stare. A single, final sigh escaped her lips, a wisp of steam in the cool air. And then it was over. The man holding her let out a sound that was not a word, but a raw, guttural cry of pure agony that seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of the day. He collapsed, cradling her lifeless form, his own long life date on his wrist a cruel mockery. He would have to live with this moment for another 43 years. Elias felt a profound, nauseating vertigo. He saw the locket on the ground, a meaningless trinket that had become an instrument of destiny. He saw the grief on the man's face, a preview of the pain he would inflict upon his own loved ones. He saw the crowd, their faces a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and a quiet, personal terror as they each, inevitably, thought of their own shimmering numbers. He backed away slowly, the man's cry echoing in his ears. The world had not ended. The traffic would be cleared. The body would be taken away. The news would report a scheduled departure on the Stirling Bridge. For everyone else, it was a momentary disruption. For Elias, it was a dress rehearsal. The finality of it was absolute, suffocating. There were no miracles, no near misses. The clock did not stutter. He walked until his legs ached, ending up on the quiet embankment, the taste of salt and dread in his mouth. He finally dared to look at his wrist. The numbers were still there, faint but undeniable. September 22nd, 2077, 17 days. The machine was still running. The gears were still turning. The woman on the bridge hadn't died because she stepped in front of a bus. She had stepped in front of the bus because she was meant to die. The cause was irrelevant. The effect was preordained. Or was it? This was the question that haunted the sleepless nights of every philosopher, priest, and doomed soul on the planet. Did we walk towards our fate, or was it dragging us, kicking and screaming, towards the edge? Did her love for that locket cause her death? Or was her love for it simply the chosen path for a destination that was already set in stone? He stared into the murky water, seeing his own pale reflection. The face of a man living on borrowed time. The face of a ghost who just didn't know it yet. The cry of the grieving husband still rang in his ears, a sound that posed its own terrible question. It wasn't how will I die? Everyone knew that was a pointless query. The true horror, the one that lingered long after the shock, was something else entirely. As he stood there, watching the city lights begin to twinkle like a vast, unfeeling constellation, he felt the weight of it in his very bones. What, if anything, was the point of the time in between? The morning after the bridge, the world felt different, sharper, more fragile. The lukewarm tea Elias brewed tasted of ash, and the gray London sky pressing against his window seemed to be leaning in, listening. His small apartment in Camden, usually a chaotic sanctuary of sheet music, books, and half-finished canvases, felt like a museum exhibit dedicated to a life already concluded. Each object was a relic. Each note on the page of his unfinished symphony was a fossil. He had to force himself into the day's rhythm, a rhythm dictated not by desire, but by the cold calculus of his impending terminus. He needed money, not for the future, a concept as alien to him as a foreign language, but for the now. He needed to pay the rent on this room for 2 more weeks. He needed to eat. Most importantly, he needed to fund one final recording session for his symphony, the Animus Suite, his magnum opus, his desperate, furious prayer against the silence to come. The journey to the bank was an exercise in societal immersion. The world, since the Great Awakening, 80 years prior when the dates had mysteriously appeared on every living human, had restructured itself with terrifying efficiency. Advertisements plastered on the sides of sky trains and holographic billboards catered to the 2 distinct classes of humanity, the short-timers and the long-haulers. For the former, there were ads for last wish cruises, terminal adventure packages, and hedonistic resorts in zero gravity. Live your last year like it's your only one slogan screamed in vibrant neon. For the latter, the messaging was all about stability, legacy, and patience. Generational wealth management, century bonds, cryopreservation, because 90 years isn't enough. The world had bifurcated its aspirations. One half chased fleeting ecstasy, the other cultivated enduring dynasties. Elias was a short-timer, a fact that felt branded on his forehead. He entered the grand, sterile lobby of the Kronos Bank, a place that smelled of old money and antiseptic certainty. The tellers were segregated. To the left, a long, snaking queue of anxious-looking people, short-timers, at windows marked temporal lending. To the right, a quiet, sparsely populated area with plush chairs and hushed conversations for the long-haulers and their legacy accounts. After a 30-minute wait, he was called to a small, glass-walled office. A man in a crisp suit, whose own terminus date was, Elias knew from a previous visit, a comfortable 50 years away, sat behind a large mahogany desk. He didn't smile. His name was Mr. Davies. Mr. Vance, Davies began, his fingers steepled, his eyes flicking to a screen. Back again. Let's see. Elias Vance. Terminus, 22nd of September, 2077. That is 16 days from now. He said it with the detached air of a man reading a weather report. I'm aware, Elias said, his voice tighter than he intended. I'm here to apply for a small personal loan. A line of credit. I have a project. Davies held up a hand, a gesture of polite but absolute dismissal. Mr. Vance, we've been over this. Your chronocredit score is, to be frank, non-existent. You have no long-term assets, no projected income beyond the next fortnight, and no collateral that can be realized in time. A loan requires a plausible framework for repayment. You represent the opposite of that framework. It's for my symphony, Elias pushed, leaning forward, a familiar desperation rising in his throat. I just need to hire a string quartet for a single day to record the final movement. It's a legacy. It's an asset an intangible asset, Davies interrupted smoothly. Art has subjective value. The bank deals in objective realities. And the most objective reality in the world, Mr. Vance, is the one printed on your wrist. I am sorry. He wasn't sorry. He was efficient. We can, however, offer you our departure package. It's a very popular option. We liquidate your remaining assets, such as they are, and provide a cash advance for you to enjoy your final days. The bank recoups its costs from your estate, if any, post-terminus. It ensures you don't leave any loose ends. The offer was grotesque, a vulture picking at his bones before he was even dead. Elias felt a surge of hot rage. So you'll give me money to die, but not to create something that might live on? For the first time, a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or just weariness, crossed Davies's face. The world is built on certainty, Mr. Vance. Your date is a certainty. Your symphony is a gamble. We don't deal in gambles. We manage inevitabilities. Elias stood up, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The glass walls of the office suddenly felt like they were closing in. He was a bug under a microscope, his entire existence reduced to a single damning data point. Thank you for your time, he muttered, the words tasting like poison. He walked out into the street, the rejection a cold knot in his stomach. This was the system, the logical, brutal extension of knowing the end. Why invest in a house that will stand longer than you? Why build a career you can't finish? Why love someone you are guaranteed to leave? The world wasn't cruel. It was just rational. And that was somehow worse. His phone buzzed. It was Lena. Her name on the screen was a small, bright spark in the suffocating gray. Thinking of you. Studio tonight. Lena. His beautiful, impossible Lena. A long hauler. Her terminus was in January 20th, 2135. 63 years after his own would expire. She was a temporal mismatch, a statistical anomaly in a world that sorted couples by their expiration dates. Their relationship was a quiet act of rebellion. To the world, he was a fleeting distraction for her, a tragic phase. To him, she was everything. He walked through the market at Camden Lock, the vibrant chaos a stark contrast to the bank's sterile order. Here, the short-timer economy thrived in its rawest form. Stalls sold last-meal kits with exotic, often dangerous ingredients. A man with a 3-month date was juggling fire for a laughing crowd. A woman was getting a full-body tattoo, a tapestry of images she would only wear for a year. There was a frantic energy here, a desperate vivacity. It was the beauty of a firefly, brilliant because it was so brief. But Elias didn't feel brilliant. He felt like he was fading. He bought a cheap sandwich and sat by the canal, watching the canal boats drift by. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo of him and Lena, taken just last month in Greenwich Park. They were laughing, the sun in their eyes. Her wrist was hidden by her sleeve, and his was angled away from the camera. For a single, captured moment, there were just two people in love, timeless and infinite. A beautiful lie. The system wasn't just in the banks and the laws. It was in their heads. It was the quiet voice that whispered to the long hauler, "Don't get too attached." It was the frantic scream in the short-timer's mind, "Hurry. There's no time." It governed every choice, poisoned every joy, and framed every love story as a tragedy in waiting. Mr. Davies was right. The world was built on certainty. It was a magnificent, terrible, and perfectly logical prison, and Elias was trapped inside, staring at the date of his own execution, wondering if there was any way to rattle the bars. He finished his sandwich, the taste gone, and looked back towards the city skyline. It wasn't just a collection of buildings. It was an architecture of acceptance, a grand monument to the death of hope. And somewhere, deep in its foundations, he felt a crack. Or maybe he just desperately needed to believe there was one. But if the date was truly absolute, as the woman on the bridge proved, then what was the nature of the will that drove him to fight it? Was his defiance also part of the design? Lena's studio was a pocket of impossible warmth in the cold, rational city. Tucked away in a repurposed warehouse in Shoreditch, it smelled of turpentine, clay, and her. She was a sculptor, and the large, open space was a forest of her creations. Figures in bronze and stone reached for unseen things, their bodies twisted in postures of longing, struggle, or serene repose. They were frozen moments of intense emotion, and Elias often felt they were the only things in the city that truly understood him. He found her by the large industrial window, her back to him, her hands covered in wet, gray clay as she worked on a new piece. It was a bust of a man, his head tilted back, his mouth open as if in song or a final, desperate cry. The likeness was uncanny. It was him. "I was wondering when you'd notice," she said, not turning around. She had a sixth sense for his presence. "It's intense," Elias managed, walking closer. He reached out to touch the clay cheek of his effigy, but hesitated. It felt too intimate, like touching his own soul. Lena finally turned, wiping her hands on an already stained apron. Her face was smudged with clay, and her warm brown eyes held a universe of concern. Her terminus date, January 20th, 2135, was a secret covenant between them, a truth they rarely spoke of but that hung in every silence. "The bank?" she asked softly. Elias just nodded, the shame of it fresh. Davy suggested I take the departure package. Liquidate my life for a final 2-week bender. A flash of anger crossed her features. "That man has the soul of calculator. I'm Soru, Ellie." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, a scent he was trying to commit to memory. Her embrace was solid, real, a temporary anchor in his swirling vortex of dread. "It's not just the money," he murmured into her shoulder. "It's the dismissal. Like my entire life, my work, it's all just a rounding error in their grand equation." "Their equation is broken," she said fiercely, pulling back to look him in the eyes. "They calculate length. They have no metric for depth. What you're creating," she gestured towards his worn satchel, where his musical scores were kept, "that has more depth than Davies will experience in his entire, long, boring life." He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to, but the fear was a parasite, eating him from the inside out. It wasn't just the fear of non-existence, the great black void. It was the terror of being forgotten, of his music, the only part of him he felt was worth saving, vanishing with him. A silent scream in an empty room. "Stay for dinner," she said, already moving towards the small kitchen she'd built in the corner of the studio. "I'll make that pasta you like. We can forget the world for a few hours." They did. As she cooked, he sat at the old, out-of-tune, upright piano she kept for him. His fingers found the keys, and he began to play the central theme of the Animus Suite. It was a melody that had come to him in a dream, a haunting, ascending arpeggio that built from a single, quiet note into a crashing wave of sound before resolving into a fragile, hopeful chord. It was the sound of a soul raging against its cage. Lena came and leaned against the piano, watching him play, her head tilted. "It's beautiful," she whispered when he finished, the final notes hanging in the air. "It sounds like striving." "It's unfinished," he said, the words heavy. "The final movement, the apotheosis, it's all in my head, but I can't get it onto the page. It's like I'm trying to write the sound of acceptance, and I don't know what that sounds like. Maybe it doesn't have a sound, she mused. Maybe it's the silence that comes after. Her words sent a chill through him. That's not very helpful for a composer. She laughed to sound like wind chimes and pulled him to his feet. Come on, you morbid genius. Eat. Over pasta and cheap red wine, they talked about everything and nothing. They talked about her new commission for a corporate lobby, a soulless project she was doing for the money. They talked about a ridiculous film they'd seen. They carefully, skillfully navigated around the massive, ticking elephant in the room. This was their ritual. They had met 2 years ago at a small gallery opening. He was brooding in a corner, and she had walked right up to him and asked him what his terminus date was. It was a shockingly forward question, even in their world. He'd told her, expecting the usual flicker of pity and the polite withdrawal. Instead, she had just nodded and said, "That's a shame. We'd better not waste any time then." Their love had been a whirlwind, a defiance of the social taboo against temporal mismatches. Her friends, all long haulers, were cautiously polite to him, treating him like a fragile, tragic pet. Her parents, wealthy and influential, refused to even meet him. They saw him as a disease she had caught, a youthful rebellion that would end in predictable, scheduled heartbreak. Later, as they lay in her bed, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the ceiling through the large window, the silence grew heavier. He was tracing the faint constellation of freckles on her shoulder when she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you really afraid of, Eli?" The question hung in the darkness between them. He'd been asked it before by therapists, by his own father. The answer was supposed to be death, but that felt too simple. "I'm afraid," he began slowly, the words forming like shards of glass in his throat, "that I'll die, and it will be like dropping a pebble into the ocean. A tiny splash, a few ripples, and then nothing. The water is the same as it was before. I'm afraid that my life, my love, my music will have had no weight, no impact." He turned to look at her, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. "I'm afraid of being a ghost, even while I'm still alive." She was quiet for a long time. He could feel the warmth of her body, the steady, slow rhythm of her breathing, a rhythm that would continue for decades after his had ceased. "Your life has weight to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've changed the shape of my world, Eli. You came into my long, predictable, carefully planned life, and you set it on fire. You taught me that a single day, lived with passion, can be worth more than a decade of just waiting." She propped herself up on her elbow, her face close to his. "You're not a pebble. You're a lightning strike. It's the world that's the ocean, vast and indifferent. It will swallow everything eventually. Me, you, Mr. Davies, this city, all of it. The strike is all that matters." He wanted to kiss her then, to lose himself in her, but a cold, insidious thought slithered into his mind. Was this love, this beautiful, passionate defense of his life, also just a part of the design? Was she the comfort provided to him on his way to the gallows? The system was so perfect, so all-encompassing. It accounted for rebellion. It commodified despair. Why wouldn't it also have a place for a beautiful, tragic love story to soothe a dying man? The thought was poison. He must have flinched, a subtle tightening of his muscles, because her expression shifted from tenderness to a familiar, wounded concern. "What is it?" she asked. "What did I say?" "Nothing," he lied, forcing a smile. "You're right. You're always right." But the seed of doubt was planted. He held her close, tried to absorb her belief in him, to make it his own. Yet, as he listened to the steady, reassuring beat of her heart against his chest, a heart that was only borrowed, a rhythm he was only renting, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an actor in a play where he knew the final line. And he wondered, with a fresh wave of horror, if she was an actor too. Was her love for him as fated and inevitable as his own death? And if it was, could it possibly be real? Desperation is a powerful motivator. With the bank door slammed shut and the clocks ticking growing ever louder in his ears, Elias took the only path left open to him. He descended into the city's underbelly, into the world of jobs that no long hauler would ever dream of taking. He signed on with a company called Chrono Demolition. The premise was simple and grimly logical. Since the terminus system predicted not only the deaths of people, but also the deaths of structures through freak accidents, collapses, and fires, Chrono Demolition specialized in preemptive strikes. They would go into a building scheduled for a catastrophic failure a few days before its terminus and salvage anything of value before bringing it down in a controlled implosion. It was safer, cleaner, and more profitable than letting fate run its messy course. The employees were, without exception, short-timers. The pay was excellent. The risks were calibrated. His first day was at the old Hawthorne Mill, a colossal brick relic from a forgotten industrial age, scheduled for a full structural collapse in 4 days. The air hung thick with the dust of a century, motes dancing in the beams of their headlamps like tiny, frantic ghosts. The foreman, a burly man named Gus with a jagged scar down his face and a terminus date just 6 months away, gave the new recruits their induction. "All right, listen up," his voice boomed, echoing through the cavernous space. "The job is simple. We stripped this place of all the copper piping, the iron fittings, the old oak beams. Anything the long haulers at HQ think is worth a damn. The building's coming down on Friday at 1400 hours sharp. Our job is to be out of here by Friday at noon. The company insurance doesn't cover anyone with a flair for overtime. You get it." A few grim chuckles rippled through the crew of a dozen men. They were a motley collection of faces, all etched with the same weary, hunted look Elias was beginning to recognize in his own reflection. They were the city's ghosts, haunting the condemned spaces, their own brief futures mirroring the buildings they were dismantling. "One more thing," Gus added, his eyes scanning the group. "The building is stable now. The models say the primary failure will be in the main support column on the east wing. But this ain't a perfect science. Things groan. They shift. You hear anything that sounds expensive, you get the hell out. We're paid to be quick, not to be heroes. Your terminus will come for you when it's your time. No need to rush to the appointment." Elias was assigned to a team of 3, tasked with stripping electrical wiring from the upper floors. One of his partners was a quiet, wiry teenager who couldn't have been more than 18, his date a mere 2 months away. The other was a man named Marcus. Marcus was maybe 40, with a cynical laugh and eyes that had seen too much. His terminus was the 23rd of September, the day after Elias's. They were neighbors on death row. "First time on the ghost crew, kid?" Marcus asked, handing Elias a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. His voice was a gravelly rasp. "Yeah," Elias admitted, the tool feeling heavy and alien in his musician's hands. "Don't worry," Marcus said with a humorless grin. "You get used to the dust. It's the same stuff we'll all be, eventually, just getting a little preview." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "The trick is not to think about it. We're just recyclers, taking things that are finished and breaking them down so the long haulers can build something new. It's the great circle of life, except with a fertilizer." The work was brutal. His hands, accustomed to the delicate dance on piano keys, were soon raw and blistered. The air was choked with plaster dust and the metallic tang of decay. Every creak of the old building sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, a primal fear that was entirely separate from the existential dread of his terminus. This was immediate. This was physical. During a break, they sat on a pile of rubble, sharing water from their canteens. "What's your story, kid?" Marcus asked, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a grimy glove. "You don't look the type. Your hands are too soft." "I'm a composer," Elias said, the words feeling ridiculous in this setting. "I need the money to record my symphony." Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. "A symphony? Jesus. Aiming high for a ghost. I was just trying to save up enough to take my daughter to see the ocean. She's 6. Her date is—" He trailed off, his gaze becoming distant. "It's a long way off. She's a long hauler. Like her mother." The unspoken tragedy hung between them. A short-timer father, a long hauler child. A guaranteed absence at future birthdays, graduations, a wedding. "I'm sorry," Elias said quietly. "Don't be." Marcus shrugged, the cynical mask back in place. "It is what it is. It's the hand we were dealt. At least I know I need to make this trip happen now. No, we'll do it next year for me." That's the gift of the terminus, right? No procrastination. Suddenly, a deep, groaning sound echoed from the far side of the building, a noise like the earth clearing its throat. It was followed by a sharp crack and the sound of cascading debris. A cloud of dust billowed down the long corridor towards them. "That's the East Wing," Marcus said, jumping to his feet. "A little early to the party." Gus's voice bellowed from the floor below. "Everybody out. Now. Evacuate. Go, go, go." Panic erupted. The crew scrambled for the exits, a disorganized retreat. Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He was running, following Marcus down a rickety metal staircase, when he heard a cry from behind him. It was the teenager. His leg was trapped under a fallen beam that had shifted in the collapse. "Help!" the boy screamed, his face pale with terror. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned back. "Come on, kid, give me a hand," he yelled at Elias. Elias froze for a fraction of a second. His date was 16 days away. The building was groaning, promising to come down. Gus's words rang in his ears. No need to rush to the appointment. This was it. A choice. A meaningless, stupid death in a dusty building for a stranger, or survival. But then he saw the look in the boy's eyes. It was the same look of disbelief and terror he'd seen on the woman's face on the bridge. And he saw Marcus, a man with one day more than him, running towards the danger, not away from it. Elias swore and ran back, his fear eclipsed by a sudden, inexplicable sense of duty. Together, he and Marcus strained against the heavy wooden beam. "On three," Marcus grunted, his muscles bulging. "1, 2, 3. With a final, desperate heave, the beam shifted just enough for the boy to pull his mangled leg free. They half-dragged, half-carried him towards the exit, debris raining down around them. They burst out into the daylight, gasping for air, just as another section of the wall behind them imploded with a deafening roar. They collapsed on the ground, chests heaving, covered in a thick layer of white dust. They looked like statues, ghosts made real. Elias came home late that night, every muscle aching, the dust of the mill clinging to his clothes and hair, a gritty film in his mouth. He smelled of decay. Lena was waiting for him, her studio filled with the warm, clean scent of her work. When she saw him, her face fell. "Oh, Eli," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror and pity. She rushed to him, but then stopped, her hands hovering in the air, unsure if she should touch him, as if his grime was contagious. "What have you done?" "I got a job," he said, his voice raw. "The money is good." "A job? Look at you. You look like you've been buried and dug back up." Her voice was trembling, a mixture of anger and fear. "This is what it's come to? Working in a place that's literally falling apart? For what? A few more notes on a page?" "It's not just notes on a page," he shot back, his exhaustion and frustration boiling over. "It's the only thing I have. The only thing I can leave. What was I supposed to do, Lena? Roll over and let the world write me off? Let your parents be right about me?" The moment he said it, he regretted it. Her face hardened. "This has nothing to do with my parents. This is about you. About this obsession. You're so focused on leaving something behind that you're destroying the life you have right now." "The life I have right now is a 16-day free trial," he yelled, the words echoing in the high-ceilinged studio, startling her sculptures. "And I have to spend it breaking my hands in a condemned building because the world you get to live in for another 63 years won't even lend me the money to make a single beautiful thing." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by a chasm of time that had never felt so wide. He saw the tears welling in her eyes, and he hated himself for putting them there. But he also saw something else in her expression, something he had never seen before, a flicker of revulsion. He was the grit under the fingernails of her clean, well-ordered, long life. He looked down at his own hands, caked in dirt and trembling slightly. The dust of the Hawthorne mill felt symbolic. It was the dust of inevitability, the grime of a system that ground people like him down. And for the first time, he wondered if it was a stain he could ever wash off. He looked back at Lena, at her beautiful, clean, tear-streaked face. Could she ever truly touch him without feeling that grit? without being reminded of the decay he represented. The chasm between them was no longer just about time. It was about something deeper, something dirtier. And he had a terrifying feeling that no bridge could ever be built across it. The money from Chrono Demolition was good, as promised. It was blood money, earned with shredded hands and a coating of grime that seemed to seep into his soul, but it was enough. Enough to rent the small, acoustically perfect recording hall at the Royal Music Archive for 4 hours. Enough to hire the string quartet. The session was booked for the 21st of September, the day before his terminus. A final, defiant crescendo. But the incident at the mill had unsettled something deep within him. The teenager, whose name was Finn, had survived. A broken leg but alive. His terminus date was still 2 months away. The collapse had not been his appointment. It was a close call, a chaotic variable in a system that preached absolute certainty. It was a flicker of static in a flawless broadcast. This flicker drove Elias not to his piano, but to the very archives where he planned to record his symphony. He wasn't looking for musical inspiration anymore. He was looking for a crack in the wall of reality. He spent his evenings after the grueling shifts at the demolition site hunched over a public access terminal, diving into the digital rabbit hole of the Great Awakening. The official history was vague, almost mythological. On January 1st, 2000, every human being on the planet, from newborns to the dying, had simply known. The numbers appeared on their wrists, faint but clear. There was mass panic, followed by religious fervor, followed by the slow, inexorable restructuring of society around this new, terrible truth. The how and why were deemed unknowable, divine, or simply a new law of physics. But Elias dug deeper into the fringes, the conspiracy forums, the academic papers that had been discredited and buried. And there he found a name that kept reappearing, Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but eccentric quantum physicist and chronologist from the late 20th century. Thorne had been on the verge of a breakthrough in what he called chronomorphic field theory, right before the awakening. His theory was radical. That time was not just a constant, but a fluidic dimension influenced by conscious observation on a quantum level. His work was dismissed as science fiction. After the awakening, he became a pariah, accusing the scientific community of willful ignorance, claiming the terminus was not a sentence, but a symptom. He died in obscurity, his terminus date passing unremarked. Elias felt a strange kinship with the disgraced scientist. He managed to unearth a scanned copy of Thorne's personal diary, locked away in a forgotten university server. The file was encrypted, but Elias, driven by a feverish obsession, spent an entire night breaking it. As the decoded text filled his screen, his breath caught in his chest. October 12, 1999. They call me a madman, but they don't see the patterns. The quantum foam is not random. It responds. It resonates. I've detected a low-frequency, planet-wide hum, a psychic resonance that is growing stronger. The collective consciousness of 6 billion people, all sharing the same fundamental anxieties about mortality, is creating a feedback loop. We are thinking so hard about our end that we are beginning to will it into a measurable state. I fear we are on the precipice of solidifying our own fate. January 2nd, 2000. It has happened. I see the numbers on my own wrist. April 17th, 2018. My God. It's not a prediction. It's a consensus. A self-fulfilling prophecy on a species-wide scale. The collective belief in its infallibility is what makes it infallible. The chronomorphic field has collapsed into a fixed state. We have collectively dreamed our prison into existence. But if it was created by belief, can it be uncreated? Elias's hands were trembling. This was heresy. It flew in the face of 80 years of lived reality. The dates weren't a divine decree or a natural law. They were a mass hallucination that had become real through sheer force of will. He kept reading, his eyes scanning Thorne's frantic entries. March 21st, 2012. Anomalies. I'm finding reports, tiny news articles, buried police records. People who should have died but didn't. A man in Kyoto, whose terminus was the day of a train crash. He missed the train. He's still alive. A woman in Brazil whose date passed peacefully in her sleep, and then she woke up the next morning. These individuals are terrified. They live in hiding. The system doesn't know what to do with them, so it erases them. They are glitches in the grand design. What do they have in common? Every one of them, in the moment of their scheduled terminus, experienced a moment of profound disbelief, a fundamental rejection of the reality presented to them. A name: the woman from Brazil, Ilera Ribeiro. The entry included a last known location, a small, isolated village in the Amazonian basin from a decade ago. It was a ghost of a lead. But then, another entry. June 5th, 2017. I found one. In London. An old woman. Her name is Anya. Her terminus was 6 years ago. She lives in total isolation, off every grid. She believes the temporal guard hunts people like her. She calls herself a stutter. I met her. I saw her wrist. The numbers are gone. Just smooth, unblemished skin. She said on her day, a gas leak was filling her apartment. She was ready. But then she saw her grandchild's first drawing, which had fallen to the floor. And she said, in that moment, all she thought was not yet. Not in anger. Not in fear. Just a simple, powerful, undeniable no. The world became malleable. The gas leak was discovered by a neighbor just in time. She survived. The belief faltered, and so the reality faltered with it. The diary entry included a coded address. A derelict bookstore in a forgotten corner of Hampstead Heath. Elias felt like he was suffocating. He left the archive, stumbling out into the night. The city, with its rigid timetables and predictable rhythms, suddenly looked like a complex illusion. The people rushing past, their lives governed by the numbers on their wrists, were they all just participants in a shared delusion? The next day, he didn't go to the demolition site. He went to Hampstead Heath. He found the bookstore, the crooked spine, its windows thick with dust, a closed sign yellowed with age hanging on the door. He tried the handle. It was locked. He circled around the back, his heart pounding. A small, overgrown garden. A single window on the ground floor was slightly ajar. He hoisted himself through, landing silently inside. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper. Books were piled to the ceiling, a labyrinth of forgotten words. "Hello," he called out, his voice a timid whisper. A floorboard creaked in the shadows. A figure emerged. An old woman, impossibly frail, with eyes that were sharp and clear as glass. She held an old, heavy-looking revolver, and her hand was surprisingly steady. "Dr. Thorne sent you, I suppose," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You're about 60 years too late. He's dead. I read his diary." Elias stammered, raising his hand slowly. "My name is Elias Vance. My terminus it's in 10 days. The woman, Anya, lowered the gun slightly, her gaze piercing. "Then you're here for hope. There's none of that for sale here, boy. Only dusty books and bad memories." "I need to know," Elias pleaded, taking a step closer. "Is it true? Can it be changed?" Anya was silent for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades, she slowly, deliberately, rolled up the sleeve of her left arm. She held out her wrist to him. It was just skin, old, wrinkled, and pale, with a fine web of blue veins beneath the surface. But there were no numbers, no skimmeting digits, no trace that they had ever been there. It was the most shocking, terrifying, and beautiful thing Elias had ever seen. "Belief is a strong anesthetic," Anya said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "The whole world is asleep, dreaming the same dream. But sometimes, just sometimes, a person has a nightmare so terrible they wake up." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "The problem, boy, is what you find when you're the only one awake in a world of sleepers. It's a lonely, frightening place." Elias stared at her wrist, his entire world tilting on its axis. The infallible law had a loophole. The unshakable truth was a lie. The prison had no walls. He felt a dizzying surge of elation, of pure, unadulterated hope. He could live. He could live. But as he looked into Anya's haunted eyes, he saw that the hope came with a terrifying price. If the dates weren't real, then what was? If the system could be broken, what held the world together? The woman on the bridge, the thousands who died on schedule every single day, what about them? Were they just the ones who hadn't woken up? A cold dread began to replace his elation. He had come seeking a simple secret, a key to his own cell. But he had stumbled upon a truth that could burn the whole world down, and he had no idea what to do with it. The discovery of Anya, the stutter, changed Elias from a condemned man into a zealot. Hope, once a foreign concept, was now a fire in his blood. He stopped going to chronodemolition. The symphony lay forgotten on his piano. His entire being was now focused on one singular, desperate goal: to replicate Anya's miracle. To wake up. He tried to explain it to Lena. He found her in her studio, the clay bust of him now sitting on a pedestal, finished and hauntingly lifelike. He grabbed her hands, his eyes wild with a fervor she had never seen before. "It's not real, Lena," he said, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "The terminus, the dates, all of it. It's a construct, a collective psychosis we've all bought into. But you can break it. You just have to not believe." Lena stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. She gently pulled her hand away. "Eli, what are you talking about? Did something happen at that job? You're not making any sense." "I met someone," he insisted, pacing the studio floor. "An old woman. Her date was 60 years ago. She's still alive, Lena. Her wrist is blank. A scientist named Eris Thorne knew about it. It's about belief. The collective belief holds the system in place, but an individual can break free if their will is strong enough." He explained everything: the diary, Anya, the theory of chronomorphic resonance. He expected her to be as electrified as he was. He expected her to see the open door he was pointing at. Instead, he saw the chasm between them widen into a terrifying, unbridgeable canyon. "Elias, please," she said, her voice soft and pleading, the way one speaks to a child in the grip of a fever dream. "Listen to yourself. A secret conspiracy? A woman who can cheat death? This sounds like the kind of story a man with 9 days left would want to believe." Her words were a physical blow. "You don't believe me." It wasn't a question. "I believe you're scared," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "And you're looking for a miracle where there are none. I've seen people do this before, Eli. They join cults. They chase charlatans who promise to reset their dates. It's a way of coping, but it's a dangerous fantasy. It ends in more pain. This isn't a fantasy. I saw her wrist," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Why can't you see? This is our chance. We don't have to lose each other." "Lose each other?" she cried, the tears now streaming down her face. "We are losing each other right now. You're not even here anymore, Eli. You're lost in this madness. I look at you, and I don't see the man who writes beautiful music. I see a stranger with wild eyes who's chasing ghosts." The argument was brutal and circular. For him, it was a matter of life and death. For her, it was a matter of his sanity. He was a man who had seen the sun, try to describe it to people who had only ever lived in a cave. Her long-hauler conditioning, the 80 years of societal proof, the sheer, ingrained certainty of the terminus, was a wall he could not breach. Her love for him made her see his discovery not as a liberation, but as a symptom of his final, desperate decline. He left her studio that night feeling more alone than ever before. He had found the secret to life, and the person he loved most in the world thought he was losing his mind. The fire of hope within him now felt dangerously hot, isolating. He sought out the only other people who might understand. Using coded messages from Thorne's diary, he found them. The glitches. They weren't a formal organization, just a scattered network of a few dozen people connected by a shared, dangerous secret. They were the relatives of stutters, researchers who had stumbled upon Thorne's work, and a few desperate short-timers like himself. He met their de facto leader, a woman named Kaylin, in the echoing chamber of a disused power station. Kaylin was sharp, intense, and driven by a fierce, protective love. Her 7-year-old daughter had a terminus date just 3 years away. Anya spoke of you, Kaylin said, her eyes studying Elias with unnerving intensity. She said you had the fire. Most short-timers who find us are just looking for a quick fix. They want a magic pill. They don't understand the philosophy. Understand, Elias said. It's about will. It's about belief. It's about more than that, Kaylin corrected. Anya's event, the other stutters, they were spontaneous, individual ruptures. Flukes. We believe the chronomorphic field is too strong now, too reinforced. A single person's will isn't enough anymore. To create a new stutter, or better yet, to destabilize the whole damn system, you need to disrupt the field itself. Create a shockwave of disbelief. She revealed their plan, a desperate gamble based on Thorne's final, most radical theories. They had been secretly assembling a device, a resonance cascade emitter, designed to create a focused psychic frequency that, if targeted correctly, could introduce a moment of universal doubt into the collective consciousness. It could, in theory, cause the dates to flicker, to falter, perhaps even to vanish. The risk was astronomical. A miscalculation could cause a catastrophic psychic backlash, potentially killing millions. Or it could do nothing at all. Elias was swept up in their desperate energy. This was it. Not just a chance to save himself, but to tear down the entire prison. Meanwhile, Lena was in torment. She loved Elias, but she was watching him spiral into what she could only perceive as a dangerous delusion. The man she loved was being consumed by fantasy, and she felt powerless to stop him. He was shutting her out, choosing his new, secret friends over her. Driven by a fear that was a mirror image of his hope, she did the only thing she could think of to save him. She went to the one person with the power to intervene. She went to his father. Elias's father, Julian Vance, was a high-ranking official in the Department of Temporal Affairs, the government body that managed the societal implications of the terminus. He was the epitome of a long-hauler, pragmatic, powerful, and deeply disappointed in his short-timer son. He saw Elias's brief life as a failed investment, a genetic anomaly. Lena met him in his sterile, high-rise office overlooking the city. She explained everything, her voice choked with tears. She told him about the glitches, the talk of a device, Elias's obsession with Eris Thorne. She wasn't trying to betray Elias. In her mind, she was pulling him back from a cliff edge. She believed Julian, with his authority, could get Elias the psychological help he so clearly needed to force him to accept his fate and live his last few days in peace with her. Julian listened with a cold, calculating stillness. He saw this not as a mental health crisis, but as a security threat, a group of dissidents, a terrorist device, an embarrassment to his family name. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Lena," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You've done the right thing. I will take care of my son." The betrayal was swift and brutal. 2 days later, Elias was at the power station with Kaylin and the others, examining the half-finished emitter. His terminus was just 4 days away. Suddenly, the massive steel doors of the station burst open. Floodlights blinded them. The sharp, authoritative commands of the temporal guard echoed through the chamber. On the ground, hands where I can see them, chaos erupted. They were surrounded. Kaylin screamed at them to run, to scatter. Elias saw Marcus, the man from the demolition crew, whom he had recruited, being tackled to the ground, his face slammed into the concrete. Elias scrambled for a side exit, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He managed to slip out into the darkness and run, the shouts and sounds of the raid fading behind him. He ran until his lungs burned, ending up in a dark alleyway, shaking and gasping for air. His phone buzzed. A message from block number. It was from Kaylin, who must have had a burner phone. They knew. Someone talked. "Marcus is gone. They took the emitter. We're scattered. Go dark." His mind reeled. Who could have known? Only the inner circle. And Lena. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact, knocking the breath from his lungs. He remembered her face, her fear, her talk of his madness. He remembered the chasm between them. She didn't believe him. She thought he was a danger to himself. And she had gone to the one person she thought could control him. His father. He stumbled to a public comms booth and called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice frantic. Eli? Oh, thank God. Are you okay? I was so worried. You did this, he whispered, his voice a dead, hollow thing. You told him. You told my father. Silence. Then a choked sob. I was trying to help you. I was trying to save you from them, from yourself. I love you. Love? He laughed, a broken, bitter sound. You didn't love me. You loved a tragedy you could pity. The moment I tried to rewrite the ending, you couldn't handle it. You had to put me back in my box. He was shaking with a cold, clear rage. You didn't betray me, Lena. You betrayed the very idea that a life like mine could ever be worth more than a sad story. You and my father, you're the real prison. He hung up, leaving her sobbing on the other end of the line. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass of the booth, the city lights blurring through his tears. He was a fugitive. His friends were captured. His hope was smashed. The woman he loved had delivered him to his enemies. His terminus date, September 22nd, 2077, burned on his wrist, now just 3 days away. It was no longer just a date. It was a verdict, and he had just been found guilty by everyone he had ever trusted. He was utterly, completely alone, but as the despair threatened to swallow him whole, a new feeling began to crystallize from the rage, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. They had taken everything from him. They had left him with nothing but his own impending end. Had they? Or had they inadvertently given him the one thing he now needed most? The city became a cage of ghosts. Every face Elias saw was a potential enemy. Every temporal guard on a street corner a potential captor. He was a man out of time, a fugitive from his own death sentence. He spent 2 days moving through the city's forgotten spaces, rooftop gardens, abandoned subway tunnels, the transient anonymity of 24-hour somnus sleep pods. The fire of hope had been beaten down into cold, hard embers of fury. Lena's betrayal echoed in his mind, a constant, painful refrain. She had chosen the comfort of the system over the possibility of his life. She had chosen certainty over love. His terminus was tomorrow. On the evening of the 21st of September, with less than 24 hours left on his clock, a coded message found its way to the burner device Kalen had insisted he carry. It was from a new number, an untraceable relay. The core is active. They didn't get it all. Thorne's failsafe. Sublevel 7, Blackfriar Station. Midnight. Your choice. K. A surge of adrenaline, the first real feeling besides despair he'd had in 2 days, shot through him. Kalen. She had escaped, and she had a final move to play. Blackfriar Station. Sublevel 7. It was officially a decommissioned pneumatic tube network, sealed off decades ago. The perfect hiding place. He made his way there under the cloak of a torrential downpour, the city a mess of slick, black surfaces reflecting distorted neon. He slipped through a maintenance hatch and descended into the earth, the air growing colder, smelling of damp concrete and ozone. He found them in a cavernous, circular chamber at the heart of the old network. Kalen was there, her face drawn and grim, along with 3 other surviving glitches. In the center of the room, resting on a makeshift platform and wired into the station's old power conduits, was a device. It wasn't the large emitter from the power station, but something smaller, more compact, a sphere of polished chrome and intricate wiring that hummed with a low, visceral energy. This was the core Kalen's message had mentioned. They took the amplifier, Kalen said, her voice echoing in the chamber. But they didn't know Thorne built the heart of the device to be self-contained. This is the original prototype. It doesn't have the range to blanket the globe, but its resonance cascade is purer, more potent. What does it do? Elias asked, his eyes fixed on the humming sphere. The big one was designed to create doubt. Another glitch, a nervous-looking physicist named Ben, explained. This one is different. Thorne called it the 0-point option. It's not about creating doubt. It's about overwhelming the chronomorphic field with a single, paradoxical concept. Kalen stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Elias's. It will broadcast a single, silent, subliminal pulse across the entire city's comms network. Not a thought, but a feeling. the feeling of absolute, infinite potential, the opposite of a fixed end. It introduces the variable of a true, unknowable future back into the equation. What's the risk? Elias asked, the cold reality of the situation dawning on him. Ben swallowed hard. The models are theoretical. Best case scenario. The pulse creates a mass stutter event. The dates on everyone within the pulse's radius, most of London, could flicker and vanish. People would be free. Scared but free. And the worst case scenario? Elias pressed. Kalen's gaze didn't waver. The chronomorphic field is the operating system of our reality now. Introducing a paradox of this magnitude could cause a fatal crash. The field could collapse entirely. Instantaneously. Anyone tied to it would be like pulling the plug. A city of 8 million people, gone in a silent flash. No pain, just cessation. Elias stared at them, the enormity of the choice sucking the air from his lungs. They were talking about gambling with 8 million lives to cure a disease that most didn't even know they had. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why is it my choice? Because your terminus is at midnight, Kalen said, her voice softening with a terrible sadness. You're the focal point. Thorne's theory posits that the field is most unstable around a departure event. To activate the device, someone has to be the catalyst. Someone has to pour their own life's potential, their own temporal energy, into the cascade at the moment it's meant to expire. You have to be touching the sphere at the stroke of midnight. You have to be the sacrifice. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just a choice he was being asked to make. This was his new, revised execution. Die on schedule as a fugitive, alone and forgotten. Or die on schedule as a messiah or a mass murderer. His final second of life the trigger for a new reality or a new oblivion. He looked at Kalen, at the desperate hope in her eyes for her daughter. He looked at Ben, terrified but resolved. They were asking him to weigh his own quiet, inevitable end against the potential salvation or annihilation of millions. He thought of the woman on the bridge, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. He thought of Marcus, beaten and arrested for a sliver of hope. He thought of his father, who would see his son's death as a tidy, logical conclusion. And he thought of Lena. He imagined her in her studio, surrounded by her timeless sculptures, living out her long, safe, predictable life. A life he had tried to burn down. A life that would be snuffed out in an instant if he made the wrong choice, or if the right choice went wrong. The thought of her vanishing, of her light being extinguished because of his rage and his hope, was an agony beyond description. He walked towards the humming sphere. It pulsed with a soft, white light, and the air around it vibrated. He could feel it in his teeth, in his bones. The sound of possibility, the sound of oblivion. It's not fair, he said quietly, to no one in particular. It's not a fair choice. The world hasn't been fair for 80 years, Kalen replied. This is the first real choice anyone has had since the awakening. To accept the cage, or to try and break it, knowing the whole world might break with it. He looked at the clock on his burner phone. 23:52, 8 minutes. He could walk away. He could go to the surface, find a quiet place, and let his 16 days of struggle, his symphony, his impossible love for Lena, simply end. He could accept the pebble in the ocean fate he so dreaded. It would be a quiet, personal defeat, or he could place his hand on this sphere. He could pour the last dregs of his life, his rage, his love, his pain, into one final, defiant act. An act that could free everyone or kill them all. He wouldn't even know which outcome he had achieved. His own consciousness would end at the precise moment of activation. He would die as either a savior or a monster, without ever knowing the difference. His unfinished symphony, the Animus Suite, echoed in his mind. He had been trying to write the sound of acceptance. He realized now he had it all wrong. Acceptance wasn't a passive surrender. Maybe true acceptance was about making the hardest choice you could, with the full knowledge of what it might cost. He looked at Kalen, whose daughter's life hung in the balance. He thought of the 6-year-old daughter of Marcus, who would now grow up without a father. He thought of the millions of Londoners sleeping in their beds, living their scheduled lives, oblivious to the fact that their entire reality was being weighed on a scale in a dusty tunnel beneath their feet. The phone read 23:59. 1 minute. He closed his eyes, and a single, clear image filled his mind. Lena's face, laughing in the sun in Greenwich Park. Timeless and infinite. A beautiful lie. Was it worth protecting that lie, even if it meant his own life was meaningless? Or was it worth risking everything for a truth that might destroy her? He opened his eyes. The humming of the core seemed to fill the universe. Kalen and the others watched him, their faces pale, their breath held. The choice was his and his alone. The weight of 8 million souls, the future of human consciousness, rested on the palm of a dying man. He raised his trembling hand towards the glowing sphere. The seconds stretched into eternities. The humming of the core was a siren's song, promising a final, meaningful act. Elias's hand hovered over the cool, vibrating surface of the sphere, the space between his palm and the metal charged with the weight of worlds. Kalen's desperate gaze burned into him. Ben was muttering what sounded like a prayer. This was it, the culmination of his frantic final days. The chance to give his death a meaning that would echo through time. He saw it all in a flash, the potential headlines. The Great Liberation, a city wakes up, or the London Silence, a metaphysical catastrophe. He would be a footnote in a story he would never read. A martyr or a demon. His identity, his very essence, would be subsumed by the consequence of his final action. And in that moment of terrible, lucid clarity, he understood. He would be trading one form of determinism for another. His life would still be defined by a single, all-powerful event. It wouldn't be his date of death, but the manner of it. He would become a symbol, a catalyst. But the man, Elias Vance, the composer, the lover, the son, would be lost just the same. The pebble wouldn't just drop into the ocean. It would be trying to boil it. His fear of being forgotten would be answered by him being remembered for the wrong thing. He wouldn't be remembered for his music, for his love, for his struggle. He would be remembered for the button he pushed. His unfinished symphony, the animus suite, the soul suite. He had been chasing its conclusion, believing it was a monument he had to build before he died. He thought its purpose was to be heard by others, to be his legacy. He was wrong. Its purpose was for him. The act of creating it, of pouring his joy, his pain, his fleeting time into its notes. That was the point. The music wasn't the artifact he left behind. It was the life he was living. With a startling sense of peace, he lowered his hand. He turned away from the core. Kalen let out a choked gasp. Elias, what are you doing? It's time. The clock on the wall showed 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 45 seconds. No, Elias said, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the sudden, tense silence. He looked at Kalen, his eyes full of a sorrowful understanding, not pity. This is your choice, your hope. You're asking me to make it for you. You're still letting the terminus dictate your actions, just in reverse. You're as trapped as everyone else. He started walking towards the exit. Where are you going? Ben stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. You just giving up? Elias stopped at the threshold of the chamber and looked back. The light from the core cast his silhouette long and dark. I'm not giving up, he said. I'm letting go. My life isn't a weapon. It isn't a key. It's just mine. For a few more seconds. He turned and walked away, leaving them in the humming silence with their terrible machine and their impossible choice. He climbed the stairs, emerging back into the rain-swept London night. He didn't run. He walked. The city felt different now. It was no longer a prison. It was just a place. The people in it were no longer inmates. They were just people, each living their own story within the strange, sad rules of their world. He knew where he had to go. He used the last of his credits, the blood money from Chrono Demolition, to override the lock on the door of the small recording hall at the Royal Music Archive. The same hall he had booked for this very day. It was empty, a cavernous, silent space filled with the ghosts of 1,000 other performances. In the center of the stage, under a single, dim spotlight, sat a magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface reflecting the faint light like a pool of dark water. He walked onto the stage. The clock on his wrist showed 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds. 10 seconds. He didn't think of Lena's betrayal, or his father's coldness, or Kalen's desperate gamble. He thought of Lena's laugh. He thought of the feel of clay on her skin. He thought of the cynical humor in Marcus's eyes. He thought of the terror and relief on Finn's face at the demolition site. He thought of the sun on his face in Greenwich Park. He sat down at the piano. He did not play the frantic, raging themes of his symphony. He did not play the complex movements he had labored over for years. He placed his fingers on the keys. 5 seconds. He played a single chord. It wasn't the chord to begin his symphony, nor the one to end it. It was a simple, quiet C major chord, the most fundamental harmony, a sound of pure, unadorned presence, a sound of being. 3 seconds. He let the chord ring out, the notes blooming in the perfect acoustics of the empty hall. It was a sound of immense peace. It was not a question. It was not an answer. It was a statement. I am here. 2 seconds. He closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He didn't see a void. He saw a flash of sunlight. He smelled turpentine and clay. He heard the sound of wind chimes. 1 second. The chord hung in the air, rich and resonant, its vibrations filling the vast, empty space. It was the sound of acceptance, not of death, but of life. A life that was short and painful and beautiful, and his. The numbers on his wrist reached their conclusion. The world did not end. The city did not wake up. In a silent, empty hall, a single, perfect chord continued to echo for a few moments more, its final, fading vibration the only witness to the conclusion of the Animus Suite. Then, it too was gone, leaving behind only a profound and perfect silence.